What happens when two racist police officers think they've caught an easy target? You won't believe the shocking twist that leaves them speechless as their prejudices unravel in the most unexpected way. In the serene town of Maplewood, life seemed harmonious on the surface. Families strolled through parks, children laughed in the streets, and neighbors exchanged friendly greetings. But beneath this idyllic facade, racial tensions simmered just below the surface, a reality many residents preferred to ignore. Some had expressed concern over recent police practices, and there were whispers about racial profiling that seemed to linger in the community. Julian Coleman, a 48-year-old man known for his leadership and integrity, had dedicated his career to bridging the gap between the police force and the community. As the chief of police, he was an advocate for change and understanding, tirelessly working to earn the trust of those he swore to protect. His journey hadn't been easy. He faced struggles within the police department itself, fights against outdated mindsets and biases, and continuous efforts to create programs fostering better relationships with the community. Julian had often found himself mediating between different factions in the department, pushing for diversity training and emphasizing the need for cultural sensitivity among his officers. His hard work and determination had begun to pay off, and he was proud of the changes he was starting to see. However, there would always be some members resistant to change, clinging to their prejudices and biases. One quiet evening, after a satisfying day spent engaging with community leaders, Julian was driving home. His thoughts drifted to the ideas he had discussed, searching for new ways to engage youth and build trust. His wife's famous pot roast was simmering on the stove, and he looked forward to relaxing with her after a long day. As he turned onto Sycamore Avenue, his modest black sedan blended seamlessly with the suburban landscape, completely unobtrusive. The air hummed with tranquility. Streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow on the pavement, enveloping the quiet neighborhood in comfort. However, unbeknownst to him, his night would soon take an unexpected and alarming turn. Suddenly, the familiar sound of sirens pierced the quiet evening air. Blue and red lights flashed urgently in his rearview mirror, a stark contrast to the calm he had just been enjoying. Stay calm, he muttered to himself, knowing the drill. He checked the speedometer 29 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone and rolled his eyes in frustration at the unnecessary traffic stop. As he signaled to pull over, two young officers emerged from the patrol car, their expressions shifting from casual to suspicious the moment they recognized the driver. Officer Daniels, eager to assert his authority, approached Julian's window with a flashlight in hand, while Officer Lane lingered near the back, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Officer Daniels barked, his tone dripping with condescension. Julian took a deep breath, trying to keep his face neutral. "No, officer, I'm just on my way home," Julian replied evenly, his voice calm but firm. Years of training had taught him that in these situations, maintaining composure could help de-escalate potential conflict. "License and registration," the officer demanded, glaring at Julian as though he were a criminal. Julian reached for his wallet slowly, narrating each movement as the officer's flashlight danced across his face, lingering just a second too long. He could feel the heaviness of the moment, the pressure mounting in the air. "Have you been drinking tonight?" Daniels pressed, skepticism etched on his face, probing for any reason to escalate the situation. "Absolutely not. I'm simply heading home from a meeting with community leaders," Julian explained, his voice steady and clear. The tension seemed to increase, with the officers clearly looking for signs of guilt or misbehavior in his demeanor. "License and registration," Daniels repeated, ignoring Julian's explanation and insisting on compliance. Julian complied, calmly retrieving his documents. "I'm getting my registration now. My license is in my wallet," he said, attempting to remain polite even as the officer's hostility was evident. To his growing frustration, the officer's attitude did not waver. "Step out of the vehicle." "Is there a problem, officer? I'm complying fully," Julian asked, genuine confusion lacing his voice. "I said step out of the vehicle now," Daniels yelled, the escalation shocking Julian. A mix of disbelief and anger coursed through him. He reluctantly unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out, hands raised where the officers could see them. To his disbelief, the second officer, Officer Lane, moved swiftly, grabbing Julian's arm and yanking him toward the patrol car. "Is this really necessary?" Julian questioned, feeling a knot of dread form in his stomach. "Resisting, huh?" Officer Lane sneered, the arrogance dripping from his voice. "You want to play that game? Fine by me." The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Julian's wrists as he was shoved into the back seat of the squad car. A twisted irony struck Julian as he sat there, recalling countless instances where he had mediated community relations. Here he was, an innocent man detained by officers who had no idea who he truly was. He could feel his heart racing, not just from the humiliation, but from the unrelenting knowledge that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a manifestation of systemic racism that plagued so many communities. As the patrol car rattled down the street, Julian glanced out the window, watching familiar landmarks blur past. His mind raced, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. Would anyone come to his aid? Would his wife worry when he didn't arrive home at the usual time? He had built a life based on trust, and here he was, stripped of his dignity. The two officers in the front seat were laughing and joking, oblivious to the storm brewing in the back seat. Officer Lane glanced back through the rearview mirror, smirking. "So, what's your story? Late night drug run, or you just like giving us a hard time?" Julian met the gaze of the young officer, a steely resolve in his expression. "I'm just a man trying to get home," he replied, his voice unwavering. The officers exchanged glances, their amusement dissipating slightly. They had no idea who they were messing with. As they pulled into the precinct parking lot, Julian took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. He had to remain calm and collected, even if it felt utterly humiliating. Once inside, he planned to identify himself and take control of the situation. Just as they were about to exit the vehicle, Sergeant Harris, a no-nonsense veteran of the force, arrived on the scene. Julian caught a glimpse of the sergeant's familiar face, relief washing over him momentarily. Perhaps he could avoid this scandal spiraling further out of control. "What's going on here?" Sergeant Harris asked, confusion etched on his brow as he took in the scene. "Well, we had a suspicious driver, and—" Officer Daniels began, but Julian cut him off. "Excuse me, Officer Harris, but I think you should know this is Chief Coleman." Silence enveloped the parking lot as the realization crashed over the younger officers like a tsunami. Their faces fell, transitioning from bravado to sheer horror as they processed the magnitude of their error. "Chief Coleman?" Officer Daniels stammered, eyes wide as disbelief washed over him. "Yes, and I'm sure you realize this is a serious breach of protocol," Julian replied, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "You have no idea how damaging this will be for your careers." The atmosphere shifted dramatically. The absurdity of the situation morphed into a moment of reckoning for both officers. They knew they had crossed a line, one they could not possibly explain away. "Is this how you treat the chief of police?" Julian's voice rose slightly, barely holding back the frustration. "You have no idea how many people in this community are watching that you've just arrested someone whose only crime bill being black in a town where systemic racism persists." Sergeant Harris stepped forward, his expression serious. "Take those cuffs off him now." Nervously, the other officers fumbled to comply, their confidence evaporating in the face of authority. Julian's heart raced as he felt the cuffs unclasp, a surge of freedom revitalizing him momentarily. "I expect a full investigation into this matter," Julian stated firmly, pride swelling in his chest. He wouldn't let this act of ignorance slide. This was more than just a personal affront. It was emblematic of a broader issue that needed to be addressed. He took a moment to compose himself, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "And I want a formal apology from both of you," he added, locking eyes with the officer. "You need to understand the impact of your actions, especially on someone who has dedicated their life to law enforcement and community relations." The younger officers stood in shock, their bravado shattered. Julian could sense their regret, but he also knew that acknowledging their mistakes would take more than just words. As he emerged from the patrol car, Julian took deliberate steps toward the precinct building, his heart still pounding. While this incident was incredibly demoralizing, it also ignited a fire within him, a determination to push for real change. Days passed, as Julian processed the events leading up to that fatefully ridiculous night. He met with the town council, community leaders, and even held listening sessions with various residents to discuss his harrowing experience. The community listened, absorbed in his tale of being unjustly profiled. His narrative struck a chord that resonated, igniting meaningful discussions about police practices and the experiences of residents in Maplewood. This moment became a catalyst for change, a chance to reshape how officers engaged with the community and dismantle the harmful stereotypes that persisted within the ranks. As pressure grew for accountability, Julian teamed up with community leaders to launch new initiatives aimed at police transparency and reform. They established workshops focused on racial bias training, community policing strategies, and even outreach programs aimed at building relationships with young adults. The public's response was overwhelmingly supportive, a testament to the town's desire for positive change. Julian felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that his experience would not be in vain. He was driven by the hope of creating a better future for all residents of Maplewood. However, there were still challenges and skeptics. Not everyone in the police department welcomed the changes. Some officers remained entrenched in their old ways, challenging the progress Julian fought to cultivate. But Julian was undeterred. He was a leader, and he wasn't going to back down. At one pivotal town hall meeting, he stood before both community residents and police officers, ready to address the elephant in the room. He recounted his experience with Officer Daniels and Officer Lane, emphasizing the need for accountability and compassion within law enforcement. "This incident was not just about me," Julian said passionately. "It's about recognizing the deeper issues at play within our system. We must confront our biases, our assumptions, and work towards being better officers and better citizens." He noticed the murmurs of agreement ripple through the crowd, a palpable shift as residents began to see the importance of collaboration between the police force and the community. Conversations sparked around unity, understanding, and trust. Julian continued, "It starts with us. Each of us has a role to play in shaping this community. It's time to open our minds and hearts, to foster communication, and to pave the way for future generations." With each word, the atmosphere transformed. The discussions grew earnest, profound connections established as barriers were broken down. Both officers and community members began engaging in conversations that prioritized mutual respect and a desire for growth. As the weeks and months passed, the changes Julian advocated for began to take root, slowly altering the culture within the Maplewood Police Department. New policies were implemented, focusing on community engagement, dedicated outreach programs to schools, and developing a task force aimed at actively reducing racial disparities in policing. At every junction, Julian remained at the forefront, guiding the charge, relentlessly fostering stronger ties to the community. And as positive transformations took hold, the officers who had once deemed him just another black man began to understand the importance of their responsibilities. In time, even Officer Daniels and Officer Lane found themselves challenged to reconsider their views. They attended the new workshops, interacting with community members and becoming aware of their own implicit biases. They learned to navigate interactions with empathy, fostering understanding in their ranks. Julian's journey from being wrongfully detained to becoming a catalyst for change was not easy. There were moments of despair, frustration, and resistance along the way. Yet, he remained steadfast in his commitment to ensure that no one else would have to endure the injustices he faced that night. The unity forged in the community became evident during annual events and town gatherings. With food trucks, live music, and booths showcasing local artisans, residents came together to celebrate diversity and inclusion. The entire event served both as a testament to the town's progress and as a reminder that everyone was responsible for their actions. Julian had not only championed change within law enforcement, he had sparked a movement that bridged gaps, bringing people together. And as he stood on the steps of the town hall, surveying the joyful crowd, he smiled, realizing that his experience no longer defined him. Rather, it had propelled him towards something greater, a legacy of understanding, justice, and hope for his community. Maplewood would become a place where everyone, regardless of their background, had a voice, where compassion would guide their interactions, and where respect would become the cornerstone of their society. And so, Julian continued his work, the chief of police, who had once been in handcuffs but had risen to create a future where understanding and unity would shine above all else. Months later, during a community event organized by the police department, Julian stood before a crowd of familiar faces, neighbors, families, and even the officers who had once misjudged him. He took a deep breath, reflecting on how far they had come since that fateful night. "It's crucial that we understand each other," he stated, addressing the audience. "When we don't, we miss out on the potential for unity. We all have a responsibility to foster trust that protects our community, no matter the circumstances." As he spoke, people nodded in agreement, the past gradually fading as the community began to heal. The dialogue that had emerged from Julian's experience became the foundation for a stronger, more compassionate Maplewood. In the end, Julian's story was not just about one man's fight against prejudice. It was about an entire community coming together to create real change. It became a powerful reminder that even in the unlikeliest scenarios, growth can emerge from adversity. And so, as the sun set over Maplewood, casting warm hues on the smiling faces gathered in celebration, Julian knew together they had forged a new path, one built on empathy, respect, and a collective commitment to a brighter future.